Good morning, everyone. I call this meeting of the Public Accounts Committee to order. This morning we have with us the Emergency Management Office, and we will start with introductions, but just a quick reminder for everyone to make sure your phone is on silent. We'll start with Mr. Horn.
Bill Horn, MLA for Waverley Fall River Beaverbank.
Suzanne Lawrence-Croft, MLA Lunenburg.
Chuck Porter, MLA Hants West.
Joachim Stroink, Halifax Schwacho.
Good morning, Ian Rankin, Timberley Prospect.
Good morning, welcome. My name is Tim Houston. I'm the MLA for Pictou East.
Good morning, Dave Wilson, MLA for Sackville-Cobequid.
Alan McMaster, MLA for Inverness, in your chair. We have Mr. Spicer with us from the Auditor General's office.
Terry Spicer, Deputy Auditor General.
And we will start with introductions, beginning with, we'll begin on the right here.
Good morning, Andy Latham, Executive Director of the Emergency Management Office.
Kellyanne Dean, Deputy Minister for Department of Municipal Affairs.
Paul Mason, Director of Emergency Services with the Emergency Management Office.
Thank you, and we will, Ms. Dean, you can now proceed with your opening comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for the opportunity to appear this morning and speak of the important work being done by the Emergency Management Office, or EMO, as we refer to it. As you know, joining me today are Andy Latham, Executive Director, and Paul Mason, the Director of Emergency Services. Andy joined EMO in 2005 after a 30-year career with the RCMP, so I know we're in good hands. Paul's worked with the province since 2007, following 10 years in the banking and insurance industries. The Emergency Management Office has been in place in our province in one form or another since the 1950s. In fact, the Civil Defence Act created the first version of EMO, called Nova Scotia Civil Defence, in 1954. This organization was renamed the Emergency Measures Organization Nova Scotia in 1961, and in 1990 the current Emergency Measures Act was proclaimed. The mandate of EMO is to enhance Nova Scotians' safety and well-being through innovative, collaborative, and integrated emergency planning and response. Today, EMO has 26 staff and a budget of $7.4 million. This includes the 911 systems budget of $4.7 million and $2.7 million for emergency management. As of April 2014, responsibility for EMO moved to the Department of Municipal Affairs. Over the past 20 years, EMO has coordinated the response for 16 major disasters, including the Cape Breton flood, Swissair, Hurricane Juan, and White Juan. This morning, I'll share the 4 core functions of emergency management and how EMO administers these functions. After that, I'd be pleased to answer any questions you may have. The 4 pillars of emergency management are mitigation, preparedness, response, and recovery. In terms of mitigation, here in Nova Scotia, we help administer programs like the Federal National Disaster Mitigation Program and the Provincial Flood Risk Infrastructure Program. These initiatives provide communities with funding to help increase resiliency in the event of a disaster. Another key piece of EMO's work involves helping municipalities plan and prepare for an emergency. EMO employs 4 emergency management planning officers outside of Halifax, each of whom are responsible for various regions in our province. They're located in Truro, Sydney, New Minas, and Lunenburg. EMO ensures that each municipality in our province has an up-to-date emergency management plan. In addition to a plan, the Emergency Management Act requires that all municipalities have an emergency management coordinator, an emergency management committee, and an emergency management bylaw. Of course, any good plan involves training, and EMO develops and delivers a variety of emergency management training programs throughout our province. EMO and other provincial government departments and outside organizations participate annually in simulated disaster exercises. These exercises help us to improve our response in the event of an actual emergency. In advance of a weather event or following a disaster, EMO activates what is called the Provincial Coordination Centre. This centre is co-located with HRM Emergency Planning and Public Safety Canada and allows representatives from all necessary groups to come together during an emergency to manage resources and responses. For example, this centre was activated during the mid-February snowstorm, which saw some areas of our province get over 50 centimeters of snow. Responding to emergency situations entails that EMO builds good relationships with partners and stakeholders. To that end, EMO maintains connections with critical infrastructure partners, including the military, the federal government, Nova Scotia Power, Eastlink, Bell Alliant, the fuel industry, the Retail Council of Canada. For example, in last fall, when many wells ran dry in southwest Nova Scotia, municipalities asked for help accessing drinking water. So EMO reached out to the Retail Council of Canada and Labatt Breweries of Canada, and shipments of donated and purchased water were delivered to the region within a couple of days. EMO also arranged for use of a water tanker and access to provincial parks and schools for showers and water. This was all possible because of our relationships with partners inside and outside government. EMO also plays an important role supporting recovery efforts following disasters. EMO is responsible for administering the Disaster Financial Assistance Agreement. This agreement is a shared program between the federal government, provinces, and territories. It is for insurable losses from disasters and can only be enacted when damages exceed $3 million for Nova Scotia. This is a rigorously audited program, and the province must follow guidelines on the eligibility of claims so it can recoup federal funds. I'm sure that many in this room are familiar with the CBRM Thanksgiving Day flood and the damage to people's homes and belongings which resulted from this natural disaster. Currently, EMO continues to process disaster financial assistance claims related to the flood. So far, we've received more than 1,100 applications and have issued 413 payments totaling $6.6 million. Another key aspect of EMO's work involves managing the 911 system. As we all know, 911 is the number people call when we're faced with an emergency situation. Approximately 230,000 calls to 911 are processed in Nova Scotia every year. And finally, EMO coordinates our province's ground search and rescue programs and administers the Alert Ready system for Nova Scotia. Alert Ready is designed to deliver critical and potentially life-saving alerts to Canadians through television and radio, and was developed in partnership with the federal, provincial, and territorial emergency management officials, Environment Canada, and the broadcast industry. I'll be happy to expand further on emergency management office and activities, and would like to say that I'm proud to be associated with the important work done by this very dedicated group of people. Thank you for this opportunity, and I welcome your questions.
Thank you, Ms. Dean. We will begin with Mr. Houston of the PC Caucus with 20 minutes of questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the introductory comments. As somebody from a finance background, it seemed like your colleague from the RCMP background got more of a shout out than your colleague with a finance background.
He's really good too.
We're
in really good hands
just
there
an
too.
observation. In terms of the Cape Breton, floods, I want to focus on those specifically. But before I do, how many times has the federal disaster recovery program actually been enacted in the last, say, 10 years?
In the last 10 years, well, I believe that we have operated the Disaster Financial Assistance Program 16 times in response to 16 disasters. So again, it's dependent on the threshold and the magnitude of...
So 16 kind of applications,
yes,
so we say, and
yeah.
Did they all meet the threshold?
Yes, they did. So for example, it dates back to 1999. Tropical Storm Harvey, I'm not sure if you remember that. There was a flood in 2000 in Cape Breton. So Hurricane Juan, of course, people will remember, that was 2003, so the DFA was enacted then. There was another blizzard in 2004. There was flooding on the South Shore in 2005. Tropical Storm Noel in 2007. There was a Labor Day flood in 2008. Meat Cove floods in 2010. So there were a number of floods, and again, bringing us up to current day with the Thanksgiving Day flood in Cape Breton.
Okay, so the last,
16 times.
The last prior one before the Thanksgiving floods was 2010?
2014, actually, there was flooding December 9th to 12th.
And where was that at?
I believe that was Truro.
Right, okay, right, of course, yeah. Okay, now in terms of the Cape Breton floods, how many homes have been designated by EMO as uninhabitable? Is that the 1,100 you referred to? You referred to 1,100 claims, I guess, in your opening comments.
Well, maybe I can clarify. So in the wake of the flood, CBRM would be the first responders on the ground looking at the damage, and they determined that there were approximately 18 homes that were deemed uninhabitable, so people needed to leave those premises immediately. There may have been other homes as well, but there has been focus on these ones because they were the most severely damaged during the flood. The 1,100 claims represent a variety of I guess, experiences that people would have had, from damage to homes, to businesses, to not-for-profit organizations, because they are all eligible to apply under the DFA, and they would represent varying degrees of damage.
Okay.
Right.
So in terms of the 18 uninhabitable homes, how many of those would have had their private insurance claims denied? Would all of them have had their private insurance denied, or?
Well, I guess what I would back up a little bit. Every case is different, and we have to work with individual homeowners and their specific policies. So the way the program works is that it looks at what insurance somebody would have had in place, and it also we do an assessment of the damage, and then look at all of those factors together. So I'm not going to speak about individual homeowners and their insurance policies. What I will say is that there was an approach that we took to try to deal really fairly with all of those homeowners and try to get them in the best position possible through the program.
Okay, maybe I'll ask it another way. The 18, those 18 homes owners specifically, are any of them still awaiting some form of compensation?
Yes, there still are some. The majority of them have been dealt with, and we're working through the process with them. There are a number that whose claims have not been fully settled. What I will say, though, is that we had the ability to advance 50% of the claim to ensure that people at least could get a start on rebuilding their lives, on ensuring that they could replace some of the contents of their home, or for those that were going to do repairs, could begin those repairs.
Okay, so so some of the 18 are still waiting for full settlements. There was 1,100 total claims. 416 of them have been settled, so the vast majority of those have not been. I guess what I'm trying to understand is we're 5 months past now. Is that a long time to sort these out, or?
I would say that it is not a long time to sort these out, and I'm going to get Andy to elaborate on this in a moment because he has had experience with these programs over the years. But from what I have seen, this process does take time, and in fact, we responded more quickly this time, I think, than we ever have, given the magnitude of the damage to people's homes. We wanted to make sure people knew there was going to be a program there in place to help them. But the challenge is that we need information from insurance providers, and sometimes that takes time. Assessments have to be done of homes and contents, so that information has to come in. The other piece is assessments of soil contamination to determine exactly what the true state is for particular homes and whether there's going to be a level of cleanup required. So all of those elements take time to determine, and we were able to get all of that done by December in order to work with these homeowners, as an example. The other thing is that we are at the mercy of people taking the time to process their claims and send the information into us. But Andy, perhaps you may want to elaborate on that.
I guess, and just as you do, is it a fact that the response has been quicker? Like, are you able to look back at, say, like a White Swan and compare the timelines for settlement?
I would say that the response to getting a DFA program in place has been quicker this time.
To getting it in place, but does that get it to people?
Again, it's dependent on the information coming into us, but oftentimes it's a month into a disaster before the Disaster Financial Assistance Program is announced. And we had that announced within a week following the disaster that occurred in Sydney.
Okay, maybe you want to comment on
Mr. Latham?
the speed versus prior ones? Yeah. Just in terms of is it a quicker response, like in terms of settlement of claims compared to White Swan, I guess, is one that sticks out.
Each circumstance, as Deputy Dean spoke about, is in and of itself, each one of those disasters is unique. And so in White Swan, whereas claims, this is the first time that the province has purchased residences as part of the disaster financial assistance, and so that's a complicating factor. The other complicating factor in addressing each one of the claims is the private homeowner dealing with their own insurance, because as the deputy spoke about, this is not a replacement for private insurance. And so what we did was we hired appraisers on the ground, we hired 10 extra folks to be out there, and plus augmented our staff by 5 extra as well in order to process the claims quickly. So the 18, majority of those claims have been settled for the folks that were out of their homes, and the remaining issues are between the homeowners and their insurance, and once that is settled, then they'll be able to fully deal with us, but they know exactly what it is that they have to do, and that's what they're doing. As far as the claims that are coming in, that is something that you're always, in the first week when the program was first announced, what happens is people aren't necessarily making their applications right away. They have to deal with their private insurance. There's a number of issues that, as homeowners, that we all deal with. And then once they understand what they are covered for with their insurance, they may be going solely with their home insurance. And you can see just by the way that I'm answering your question, you can see the complexities for each and every one of those cases. So what we've done is streamline the process as much as we can, and then you continue to get applications, and we continue to get applications as recently as 3 weeks ago.
Okay. Okay. Do you have a sense as to the cost of the Cape Breton floods? Like, what will be the dollar amount spent, I guess, on
Ms. Dean?
claims?
It's difficult to know because we're still doing an assessment of all the damage, because there's infrastructure damage that, TIR is fixing. There's the CBRM has had to fix infrastructure as well. We estimate it's in the $15 million vicinity.
Okay.
But we won't know.
And then how much of that would the feds pay?
Yeah, so I'm going to get Andy to explain the scale. It's a graduated scale. The first $3 million is, I guess, what you would call our deductible. So the province would pay the first $3 million, and then the federal government pays a portion, increasingly more of that portion, the more the province spends.
Okay. So roughly, do you know, if let's say it was 15, what would they pay?
Mr. Latham?
Thank you. Sorry, Mr. Chair. Canada, the federal government would pay 90%, and the province would pay 10 at that point.
Of the difference between 3 and 15?
That's right.
Yeah, okay. And have we received anything from the federal government yet, or does that come?
No, we haven't made the claim. As a matter of fact, I met with officials yesterday and discussed the claim, but this is ongoing because there are still amounts from Transportation Infrastructure Renewal, from CBRM, and it usually takes upwards of several months to collate all the data to make the submission for claim. And that has been the experience here in Nova Scotia and with my PT colleagues across Canada.
Okay. Just to give me some idea of perspective, have the feds paid on the 2014 Truro floods?
No.
No?
No.
And the one before that was 2010, that was at Meat Cove. Have they paid on that?
I think the last, the ones that are outstanding are from Meat Cove, from Meat Cove forward, that they're in audit or in process. So the submissions are made, and then there is a very rigorous audit process that the federal government undertakes, and they will send auditors down here. They will review the files, they will take the information, they will go back and assess that against their criteria, then they will come back again and we'll have the opportunity to have that discussion and clarify the issues that they have raised. Then they will take that information, and it's a continuous process until there's several audits until we receive a payment.
Thank you. Switch gears a little bit. In terms of this Emergency Services Provider Fund, is that something that falls under your
No. DME.
under your thing, Ms. Dean?
Ms. Dean?
That is a Department of Municipal Affairs program. Yes,
Okay.
it's not administered by EMO. It's administered, though, within DMA.
Right.
Yeah.
I see the relevance, though, to EMO.
Absolutely.
So I'm just wondering, because it always occurs to me, like when departments want to apply to the fund, they send that application to the fire marshal. But it was never really clear to me where sometimes it's under the labor and advanced education budget or whatever, but it's actually it's under the Department of Municipal Affairs budget, is it? And that the annual allotment for that fund is about $500,000?
It is, yes. I don't have the details of that with me, but yes,
Yeah, okay. So that fund used to be a lot bigger.
it did.
And but it's been cut down. Is there any? I know that volunteer firefighters and their departments are kind of struggling around the province. Somebody told me there used to be like almost 10,000 volunteer firefighters in Nova Scotia, and now there's like 7,000. So just wondering how, when these disasters happen, they're the people we turn to most often. First is the volunteer fire department. So I'm just wondering, what is the thought around that fund, and do you see the impact on the departments of?
Ms. Dean?
Thank you. Just checking. And again, I don't have the full details of the Emergency Services Provider Fund with me. What I do know is that we do our best to ensure that the needs of those local organizations are met. It provides protective equipment, and we try to do what we can with the resources that we have. And then in some instances, we are able to augment those resources if we have flexibility in other program areas. I can't speak for the past. The program that we administered this year, did reach out to a number of organizations and provided some critical equipment that had been requested. And I'd be happy to get you the information on that. I just don't have that with me right now.
Okay. Okay, we can do that. Just my understanding of that fund is it's like $20,000 per claim, I guess, the department makes, and they can only do it every 3 years. So, and I was just curious about how that splits down. But I guess I'd ask a general question in general terms, in terms of a disaster like that. The volunteer firefighters on the ground are a big part of the response, I'm sure. Yeah. Would you say how much of a response? Are they 20% of the, obviously on a flood's different than a forest fire, of course, but they're pretty important, I guess, to the process. Is that fair?
I would say that's fair. Yeah. Go ahead. I mean, oftentimes they're the first responders, they are there. But, everybody in an emergency situation has a role to play and makes a contribution depending on the response to the particular emergency. As an example, they were critically important in providing support to the residents in Sydney with ensuring that shelters were open and providing support to families who were displaced in the early part of the flood response. So they're a critical partner for us in the coordination of the EMO effort and the response effort.
And you mentioned in your opening comments about municipalities having an EMO designated person, I guess, for local interaction and some training that's available. I'm just wondering, with the changes to the health, to the Department of Health and the new health, Nova Scotia Health Authority, there used to be local, let's call it management at each of the hospitals, and that really doesn't exist anymore. So I'm wondering how EMO interacts with the local healthcare professionals to make sure that they're ready for a disaster. Does that come through the municipality officer, or how would you be reaching and making sure that the hospitals and healthcare facilities are ready for a disaster as well?
Yeah, I'm going to ask Andy to respond to that one.
Mr. Latham?
Thank you. So the Department of Health has its own emergency coordination center, and Mr. Russ Stewart heads that, and they interact with all hospitals and health authorities, and they are the central body that does that. So we're an acronym-rich organization, Departmental Emergency Planning Officer. So Mr. Stewart is a DEPO, and if there is a situation such as a protracted power outage, which we've experienced, then Mr. Stewart contacts us, and we then provide whatever supports are required, but they are the conduit for that contact throughout the health system. And the emergency management coordinators, the EMCs, are the municipal folks that are on the ground, and each municipality has one. So those are also built into their plans. So it becomes a multifaceted response, and that's where the coordination aspect of the Emergency Management Office comes into the equation.
So, and just, I guess I'm run short on time for this round, Mr. Chair, but so we have a designated person with the health authority who's coordinating through all the local...
With the Department of Health and Wellness, if you will, is the center of that hub that reaches out to through all the health authorities. So if there's an issue and they need assistance with it, and they can't control it within the health system, they reach out to us, and we provide whatever support services are required.
And have they had to reach out to you guys in recent times?
Recently, the most recent one was when we had the protracted power outage, and we brought in the generator through, I think it was CAT, okay. And it was, and I think that was approximately 4 or 5 years ago. And it was down for a period of time, and so we made the contacts through our local folks, had that generator brought over there along with the electrician that would hook it up to work with their electrical folks. As well, we coordinated that with Nova Scotia Power, who was doing the restoration. Okay. And that's what it's about, is the coordination.
Okay, thank you.
Order. Time has expired. We'll move to Mr. Wilson of the NDP caucus.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for being here today. Definitely, it's a topic that is important to make sure that we're ready as a province to respond. So, I mean, really, I think the first question: Are we in position to respond appropriately when disaster hits Nova Scotia in whatever aspect that might happen?
Ms. Dean.
Well, I guess what I would say is that we have the plans in place to respond. We have what we refer to as an all-hazards approach, and so the planning that takes place is all geared towards being able to respond to a variety of potential situations. So it's not just one very specific situation. And I think as well we have highly trained individuals whose expertise is emergency management, and the people that are with me today are critical in that effort. Part of the framework that we operate under really ensures that all of the key people that are responsible for responding in the event of emergency understand their roles and have their plans in place. So, it's very much about being prepared in order to then execute according to the plan when an emergency happens, an emergency situation. And I think the other thing I would say is that there's the different provincial governments and individuals themselves also have a role to play in being prepared to respond to an emergency. So, beginning with individuals, we try to get information into their hands early. We try to ensure that they understand how to be prepared themselves in the event that they're without power for, a period of 72 hours. So there's public information to try to encourage awareness of the general public on their role and what they can do to enhance their own response. And then it moves from different levels of government. So typically, the municipal government would be the first responder in a disaster situation. And the Emergency Management Act that we have in the province requires all municipalities to have a plan, to have an emergency management coordinator, to ensure that they have robust plans and that they are up to speed and trained. And then at a provincial level, we also have emergency management planning officers in place, and they work very closely with municipalities to help them develop their plans and also to review them on a regular basis to ensure that they are updated. As an example, the municipalities completed climate action mitigation plans, and we made sure that elements of that were included in their emergency management plans. And again, the other piece of this is relationships and good communication, and so continuing to build those networks. So as part of our efforts in the province, we ensure that we're establishing relationships with the municipalities, with the CAOs, with the emergency management coordinators, the first responders, the regional staff, so that everybody has an understanding of their role in the event of an emergency. And again, we would support municipal applications for funding. So then at the federal level, you know, depending on the severity of a situation, you know, they are also prepared under a similar framework to engage with provinces or to engage where they're required. The Department of National Defense works closely with other federal departments and the provincial government. And the other piece I would say is that we engage regularly on broad-scale exercises that involve different levels of government so that we can test how we're going to respond. That happens on a regular basis. And the other piece that I would add, you know, are we ready? We're preparing and planning and doing the best we can to ensure that we have the training and the resources in place. You can't always predict everything that could possibly happen. But there's another, I guess, element in how these plans are developed that's really important for order when a disaster happens. And Andy, maybe you can speak a little bit about.
Well, no, that's good.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, no, I'm good with that. And I would agree that there is an importance on ensuring that those plans are in place. And I know the professionals and volunteers around this province who respond on a daily basis to emergencies are there and willing to engage. The one thing I didn't hear, and which I think is still is an important part of being ready and being prepared, is the financial component of it. Mm-hmm. We heard through questioning a few minutes ago that you know, there's still pending funding coming from the federal government dating back to Meat Cove, which definitely concerns me. The floods in Truro, that concerns me. If we have a federal government not willing to support the provinces in this country, and maybe I'll dive into that a little bit in a few minutes. So I looked at the EMO budget over the last 5 years or so, and I would think that being prepared would reflect in the budgets. And there seems to be inconsistency with the budgets. You know, so I'll go back to 2012-13, and I'll use forecast because I guess forecast would be, you know, the department, you know, trying to judge where we're going to be in that year. So forecast 12-13 was 8.7 million. Forecast for 15-16, 6.6 million, and then in between those we had 7.1 million, 7.3 million. To me, the last number of years, we've seen an increase. I don't know if you agree with me, that severe weather has played a major role in all the disasters that you've just mentioned earlier, dating back to Hurricane Juan. Would you agree with that severe weather is really what's driving the response our province has to disasters around the province?
I would say that certainly, you know, we have seen changes in weather patterns that are creating situations that maybe we haven't seen in the same magnitude in previous years.
So with looking at the last number of years in the budget, to me, would we not see a gradual increase to that budget, or are you confident that the budget that we have now for this year, I believe the estimate's 6.5. I don't know what the forecast is for 16-17. We'll find out maybe in a month or so or less. Is adequate? Is that, is that part of being ready sufficient? And if it's not, where do we need to go? How come the budget seems to me inconsistent over the last few years with the sheer number of disasters that we've witnessed over the last couple of years?
So I would say that the current budget we have is sufficient for the role that we play. I mean, we play a coordinating role and a leadership role and a training role. So, I mean, in terms of the resources that we have to do that currently, EMO is staffed to carry out the role that it has. If its role were to change, then obviously that's something that we would have to look at. But currently where we are now, we have managed to do what we need to do. I would also say that, in response to certain situations, if we need additional resources, we'll find them and we will augment that budget as we need to, depending on what we might be responding to. So, for example, with the Cape Breton flood, we hired additional staff resources to be on hand to do inspections, to help people to process claims more quickly. So, we're working within the budget that we have, but if we need additional resources, we find a way to accommodate that.
So, and I understand it. That doesn't reflect the cost of the Cape Breton flood, for example. I think there's $3 million has been spent so far. Where did that money come from? Which out of what department did that flow from?
So that would be an executive council decision around additional resources in that magnitude.
Under your, and I know your budget reflects kind of your department, your staff level. Do you have vacancies currently within EMO?
No, we do not.
That's good to hear. Do you need more resources? Are you looking at? And I know you can't get into the budget details. I try every year to try to get from our department heads. But are you looking at? Are there areas that you need? Do you find that you need some support in, or are you comfortable with the staffing level you have, or is there going to be potentially a request for more staffing?
Well, I would say at this stage that we believe that the resources that we have are what we need to deliver on our mandate. If our mandate changes, that's a different
That's fair.
Situation.
I know last year our caucus challenged the government on, and especially the Department of Environment and the Minister, on the Climate Change Division. And I don't know if you're aware or not, but that division hasn't published an annual report since 2014, and there was some confusion even if it still existed. We did hear from the minister more recently that it does in fact exist, and I'm wondering, since severe weather has played such a role in the disasters that your department had to respond to, has there been any kind of work with your EMO or municipal affairs with the environment minister and her department on the climate change division? Are you aware of it? Could you give me some details maybe of that specific engagement with that division?
Absolutely. One of the things that the province has committed to is the Pan-Canadian Framework on Clean Growth and Climate Change. And so the Department of Environment and Energy, I know, has worked very, very closely in order to put together Nova Scotia's response and participation in that Pan-Canadian Framework. So that's something that is very much on the provincial radar screen. And at the municipal level, in 2014, every municipality in Nova Scotia completed a municipal climate change adaptation plan. So that allowed municipalities to actually think about the impact of climate change in their areas, on their infrastructure, and describe enabled them to think about and describe how they would respond to climate change in their specific areas. So we have these plans from 2014 for every municipality in Nova Scotia, which enables us to actually look at their key priority areas, the trends that they're seeing, their biggest issues, so that we can then work with them to address those. And what I would say is that one of the most prevalent areas, I guess, of concern for municipalities is actually infrastructure stormwater, as an example. So having this kind of information now also enables us to look at federal funding programs when they become available and to say, okay, so what are the priority areas for infrastructure development then at the municipal level so that they can begin to get ahead of some of these challenges that they may be having from a climate change perspective. So I think we're one of the very few jurisdictions across the country where every municipality actually has a plan like this. So that information is very rich, and we're still working with that and working with municipalities. But again, that information was also shared with EMO so that they could look at how to incorporate some of that in their emergency management planning as well. So that's one very focused piece of information. We also
I appreciate that. I appreciate the fact that, requiring municipalities, and there's a huge issue around infrastructure. We all know that. In my community, we flooding because of the capacity, not able to cope with the capacity, especially from runoff. We've seen floods quite often in the community. But the plan for the province, and that was part of the criticism of the climate change division, is where is that plan? There hasn't been a report in 2014. So you're not aware that division has a report on how the province itself, it's great that the municipality has a plan, but where's the province's plan? And to what degree does the climate change adaptation enter the work of EMO? Do you see it as part of your ensuring that our provincial government has a plan? The Department of Environment needs to play a role if severe weather is impacting the things that your department responds to. So have you seen the plan from the Climate Change Division, or are you confident that they're working in a direction that is appropriate and responds to current situations dealing with severe weather in Nova Scotia?
I wouldn't want to answer for my colleague in the Department of Environment or the Department of Energy. What I can say, though, is that many of the things that you're speaking about are part of a broader pan-Canadian framework on climate change, and that the province has developed its approach based on participation in the pan-Canadian framework. The other piece, I guess I would say, is that all of the information that we glean informs, our path forward in EMO as well. So every time we experience a disaster or we're learning something as we go along, and we're adapting. I guess the other piece I would say is that there's a proactive and a preventative element, and there is a federal National Disaster Mitigation Program, for example, which allows you to look at vulnerable areas and propose ways to mitigate. Now, we have an example where we're working with the province of New Brunswick and ourselves to look at the dikes and flood mitigation opportunities, let's say the Tantramar Marshes in that area. So as an example, there's other ways that we're working with various partners and other governments and our own departments, so agriculture, environment, ourselves, to say, okay, where are certain key areas that we really need to focus on and to have some more data on so that we can make recommendations about how to mitigate, in the future.
So to go back, I know you indicated, you mentioned a couple of the federal programs. I wrote a couple notes when I heard that there's still outstanding funds for the Meat Cove incident and the flood in Truro. Are you able to give us kind of a dollar figure on what is outstanding from the federal government? I don't know if you have that in front of you. If not, can you provide it to the committee?
Okay, so we don't have that with us, but we can.
Is that, I mean, Meat Cove was 5 years ago, 7 years ago. I mean, that to me just, I mean, that's a delay. I mean, is it the fact that there was a federal government change that's delayed that, or do we have some hard-nosed auditors that, you know, our premier and our prime minister need to say, come on, we need to help these communities and these provinces? I mean, to me, that just, I find it unacceptable that we're still waiting 7 years for funding from the federal government on a program that's supposed to help provinces like ours when we have a disaster.
Right. So I guess what I would say is that the program, the reimbursement of the funding that we've already spent, so these communities have been helped. You know, they have received support already, and you know, any urgent needs have been met, their infrastructure has been repaired. So what essentially the province is doing is waiting to be reimbursed for the money that it's already spent. Having said that, the process is very, very rigorous. So, I mean, that is challenging, but you know, we have received the money from previous programs and continue to work with the federal government to ensure that we recoup what, you know, what is
So how is
eligible.
that, so thank you for that. And like, how is that booked on the province's books? I mean, to me, if it's outstanding, is it something, and maybe my colleague to my left, who's an accountant, could tell me, and maybe across the way, but how are we booking that? And maybe the Auditor General can answer that of how that reflects in our books, because I know, you know, they've been very critical to make sure that everything is represented. So I'm wondering if I could throw that out there for the last minute.
So I am not an accountant either, but I'd be happy to get you further information on that.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we will move now to the Liberal Caucus and Mr. Porter.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks to the folks for being in here this morning and as witnesses. It's interesting you mentioned, I think, 4 major incidents in your opening statement. 3 of which I was part of in a different life, Hurricane Juan, White Juan, and of course Swissair. They all had their unfortunate uniqueness about them, yet being quite directly involved in those, things seem to run quite smoothly. I think that's a true testament not only to EMO, but to those people on the ground, the police, the paramedics, the firefighters, who we don't recognize as often as we probably should. And from a regional perspective, we talked a little bit about as well the coordinators that you have, but there's more than just that coordinator. There's a lot of people coming together at that table. And having sat on that group some years back as a municipal councillor as well, and recognizing how much things have moved forward since then and maybe how we do business. I think we talked a bit earlier about we're always trying, are we ready for the next one, and what does that look like, and do we improve things? And I'm not sure improve is the right word, because I'm not sure we need to improve in some areas a whole lot, because things do seem to have a process that works fairly well, and I'm not really sure that people understand directly what that process might be or how it all unfolds. I think that's the bigger question, is when there is an incident, what does that look like? Albeit they're unique themselves, unfortunately unique themselves, but what's that rollout plan? What does that look like? I think when people think about EMO, well, they know there's this department, you know, but what are the steps? What's that hierarchy look like? I don't think a lot of people really understand that. I'm not even sure some of the EMS providers, you know, the volunteer firefighter on the ground knows he's got a job to do or she's got a job to do, you know, and they take orders from the captains and the chiefs and so on upward. And sometimes you hear them question, why do we do things this way, or why do we do things that way? I think that if there's anything missing, maybe, and I'm not sure that it's even missing, because we have good, as I said, we have good regional coordinators. You know, my area, Don Dignan, is doing a great job out there, you know, and others, Paul Maynard, and guys I know well, who've been involved in the system from an EMS perspective for a very long time. But I think that, I guess I would ask this first is, what's that breakdown? You know, something, and it doesn't just come in and then all of a sudden we activate. I realize that as well, and if you want to speak to that, that's fine. You know, we are watching. We know there's a storm coming, or we know, you know, there is an incident, maybe a Swissair. That is certainly, you can't track that. But there are many things you can track. So maybe from the things you can track, and maybe from the things you can't track. How are they different? And I'll give you some time to answer it, and it doesn't matter which one. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'd like to ask Andy to answer that.
Mr. Latham.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks for the question. It depends on the situation. as you spoke about. So at the EMC, at the Emergency Management Coordinator level of the municipality, they have duty for first response, and they have their plan. So a situation occurs and they're making their first response. As soon as they start to make their first response, they advise our emergency management planning officer, and we have one available on a 24/7 basis. So after the regular close of work, we have an on-call emergency management planning officer. And if that situation occurs in an area of the province that particular EMPO is not at when they receive the call, they call their colleague, and then they're monitoring that, and if there is further supports that are required, that is when they will activate. And within municipalities, there's also REMOs, Regional Emergency Management Office. So the municipalities that are neighboring each other also have signed agreements where they create an economy of scale, if you will, where they will respond and share resources and assets to support each other in times of emergency. Then, if that situation escalates further and there is requirement for provincial resources and assets to come in to support the folks, the good folks at the coalface that are doing the work, then there will be a consideration for activation of the Provincial Coordination Centre. And when the Provincial Coordination Centre is activated, the Director of Provincial Operations and the manager of the Coordination Centre will be upstairs at our office, and they will be calling in the folks at the departmental level, the DEPOs, Departmental Emergency Planning Officers, to come in from the respective agencies. So that's TIR, Community Services, Red Cross, Nova Scotia Power, Bell Alliant, whoever is required in that. And then those are our touch points as when answering an earlier question, that we can go to those people and they reach out to their respective organizations. And then soon as we activate our coordination center, because we are co-located, we advise Public Safety Canada. And Public Safety Canada is the federal emergency management. And at our office, we also have a military liaison officer who's embedded in our operations group. And the military liaison officer receives all the messaging that our departmental emergency planning officers do, as well as our emergency management planning officers. So they advise their chain of command of what's going on. In addition, then we can get into, we are part of the International Emergency Management Group, and that's a compact agreement that was signed by Atlantic premiers and Eastern Seaboard governors that allows us to share resources and assets in times of emergency. In addition to that, and staying within Canada, we have EMA, which is the Emergency Management Mutual Aid Agreement that exists right across the country for all the provinces and territories. And, you know, and it just can keep escalating to whatever scope it is that is required to respond to that emergency situation in order that we're providing the best level of service that we can to the people of Nova Scotia. So there's a number of steps there that I'm leaving out, but that is the escalation process that we would follow.
So one of the examples there, you talked about the interprovincial and Eastern Seaboard last year's fires, an example of that where we brought, would you have been involved in that? I assume probably you were involved in that.
We were involved in that, but there's separate agreements that Department of Natural Resources has on an international level. But we share resources. So during White One, there were resources that were brought in from Maine. They had a specific type snow removal equipment that we didn't have access to that was brought in. A small example is during the ice storm that occurred in New Brunswick. We were sharing generators with New Brunswick across the border. As soon as there's a situation that occurs, it is our agreement interprovincially. So it doesn't matter if it's the Alberta wildfires or if it's a situation here in the Maritimes. The protocol that we have is we advise our colleagues that we're monitoring that, and if they need a resource or an asset to identify it, and that we will, through the EMA agreement, provide that. And then we back away from that until they make the call. Because you have to keep your eye on the ball. You can't be taking all these other calls for assistance. So those things are in place to do that. And those are just some examples of things that have occurred here through that escalation process.
Thank you. Following an incident, regardless of what it is, I guess it probably doesn't matter, is there a debrief of sorts that your department works through that says, this went well, this went well, this went well, well, maybe we could do this a little differently next time?
Absolutely. And I will be the first to say that we are not perfect, but we strive for excellence all the time in all the work that we do. And I think that you've already spoken about the excellent work that first responders do across the province. And the emergency management practitioners are very dedicated folks as well. They're not first responders, however, they're very dedicated to their profession. So when an incident occurs, we have what's called a hot wash. And as a matter of fact, using the Cape Breton flood example, what we did was we have an emergency management conference, and we brought our emergency management planning officer to share those experiences of what was going on the ground at the time. And then we will have a further operational debrief on that when everything is completed on the file, and we'll work with Cape Breton Regional Municipality. As a matter of fact, we were hosted by Chief Terry in Member 2, and Cape Breton Regional was there. Chief Leroy, who has the emergency management file or portfolio under his office. And we were there, and we all discussed how we can work better collectively in the future, what their experience was, where their EM plans are, and there's follow-up meetings at the operational level that are scheduled and ongoing. So always learning, always wanting to improve, and we are always looking for constructive criticism in order that that can be implemented into the plans. And then we have an emergency management committee in each of the respective regions that brings all the municipal coordinators together on a regular basis, and they review either situations that have occurred, best practices, in order that they are sharing that information and keeping it updated, as well as we have an emergency management executive committee that meets quarterly, that we bring all the information from the municipalities in, and we have a forum for discussion there and a review of particular incidents or challenges in those respective areas.
Thank you. Are your REMO coordinators meeting with their municipal councils at their monthly? Is that consistent across the province? I know I've seen Dawn as an example at a municipal meeting, and I never really thought about it too much, I guess, until now. Is this a monthly event?
And each of the municipalities has a different meeting schedule, but the REMOs do report into the various councils that they provide service to.
We've had a fair bit of discussion about the events, a lot of them being weather over the years, of course. You talked earlier on, Andy, about the amount of players, if you will, partners, maybe a better word, involved, from power company, the phone company, you name it. There's a very large group, and I don't think that people understand how broad it goes sometimes. A tabletop exercise. How often is that done? You know, do you pick a weather event and say, okay, in Hants County, I'll just use my own county, in West Hants or something, there's going to be, you know, high tides, we're known for that. Is there some kind of exercise that you do on a annual, biannual, or regular basis to continually improve what you're doing?
Each of the emergency management planning officers then work with the EMCs, and it can be a variety of exercising. It could be a tabletop. It could be an actual exercise where they're running through their TMR protocols. It could be testing of ham radios. It could be testing of sat phones. And upcoming here in the next 6 weeks is an exercise that's going to be international in scope, Staunch Maple, that the military is hosting, and we are an active participant in that. In addition, ground search and rescue teams are out, and they're also training, because they can be an aid to the civil authority in times of emergency as well, and they're equipped with sat phones, so they have protocols and things that they're testing. Training, testing, exercising is something that's ongoing all the time, and always looking to learn from those as well.
Is that mandated or just a mindset?
It's a mindset. It's what we do. Sure. You can have all the best plans, and that's why the plan is all hazard. And historically, I've seen books of plans that have sat on the shelf. The all hazard plan provides the agility to deal with whatever challenge confronts municipality or whoever. And then, so you plan it out, you test it through the exercise, and then you improve that plan constantly in order that you're able to respond appropriately.
Thank you. You talked a minute ago about ground search and rescue units. Of course, we have one. West Hants Ground Search and Rescue does a great job out there, and they share those resources. They don't just cover the area of West Hants. They go all over as needed. Where do they actually fit into what we're talking about this morning? They're part of REMO, I'm going to assume, across the board, or?
Yeah, there's 24 teams across the province, of which represents approximately 1,000 volunteers, and God love them all for the work that they do, come out all times of the day and night and whatever weather to provide that service to the agencies of jurisdiction. And they are, if there is a requirement, they aided in the Porters Lake fire when they were going out and assisting with evacuations. They have also been persons at flood barricades to aid civil authority, and they're trained. They have trunk mobile radio system. They have sat phones, so they are definitely an integral part of the municipalities and for the province as well.
Thank you. Time, Mr. Chair, a couple minutes yet?
Mr. Porter, you still have about 2 minutes left.
Okay, I'll just
over
two
2
quick
minutes.
questions if I can. One, and I'm sure it doesn't make any difference, just for clarity, because it's been asked before, we have paid fire services and we have volunteer fire services. I would assume no difference in how that reacts with EMO.
I have never seen any difference. When you talk about first responders, you talk about folks that are, whether it's a ground search and rescue volunteers or it's the first responders, when there is a situation that occurs, they put their intellect, their ingenuity, their hearts to it, and generally, you have to get out of their way because they're going forward to do the job and resolve whatever situation confronts them or challenges the people of Nova Scotia.
Thank you. I just wanted to get that clarity on the record. Somebody asked me that back a while ago, and I said exactly the same thing. It makes no difference having known a lot of them. The only other quick question, do I have time for one more? Thank you. Where are we going in the future? Where do you see EMO in this office and what we're doing? Is it fairly status quo, or is it, where are we?
Ms. Dean?
Maybe a tough question.
It is a tough question. You know, I would say that I'm very proud of the staff that we have and how they work and how they interact with the community and how they interact with their partners. It's difficult to say where we're going in the future, but I think that the way we are set up now and the systems that we have in place and the relationships that have been built and the plans and their expertise in executing those plans puts us in good stead for the future.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll move back to the PC caucus and Mr. Houston for 14 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. What happens when there's damage from a weather event, but the cost doesn't get up to the $3 million threshold? Does that fall to the municipalities, or is those two separate things? I guess the $3 million triggers the federal, but there's still going to be provincial support if there's a weather event. I'm just wondering, at what point can a community expect some help?
Yeah. Well, I'll start, and then I may, and then I may hand it over to Andy. But in terms of being eligible for the federal programming, there's a $3 million threshold. So that would mean that the extent of damage that the province has paid for would be in the $3 million would be up to $3 million. Obviously, we may still incur more costs because it's cost shared. But if there's something that happens and it's below a $3 million threshold, that doesn't mean that the province doesn't help or doesn't try to find ways to support or provide some support to communities. So, I mean, we have the ability to look at situations and see if there's other ways to support or to help. And I know that, you know, our colleagues in the Department of Transportation Infrastructure Renewal certainly step up when they can. So just because an event doesn't cost $3 million doesn't mean that there isn't some level of support or some way to help with.
Okay,
with
so I
that.
guess when some event happens and there's people realize around the province something's happened, does EMO kind of make a judgment? Well, that's probably going to be more than $3 million. We better get activated here, or how does that?
Andy, do you want to?
Mr. Latham?
Thank you. We don't activate based on a dollar situation. We activate based on the requirement, the need. So if an emergency management coordinator at the municipal level is saying, look, need assistance here, or I see that there's some potential here, then our emergency management planning officer is right there with them. And then, as I had explained to the colleague across from you there, that it then just escalates through that to scope out whatever is required as far as the operational response.
Okay, just to give me some order of magnitude. So in 20 years, I think you said there was 16 federal claims. How many times would EMO provincially have been activated? Like,
well, so we activate as recently as the recent blizzard. We were activated for 60 hours straight, and our coordination center was open, and we were there, and it was fully staffed during that time. And after about 24 hours, I can tell you it's like camping with none of the fun. because you're there and we're bringing folks in. We have, our fridges and stoves, and we're
And that's an example where the federal thing won't be triggered.
will not even come in to consideration. So some years, the year, the year of the big snow, and I just can't, just can't, 3 years ago, we were activated 9 times in a series of less than 2.5 months. And then we go for a period and not activated. And it depends. If there is, in the accounting world, if there's a return on that investment, then that's what we're looking at. If those folks are better used on the ground, then absolutely that's where they should be, and they're taking care of that. If there's a requirement, then there's never a question. We open up the coordination center and bring in the resources and assets that are required.
Right. Okay, so it's probably more than we realize. So in terms of the blizzard a couple weeks ago, so that was 60 hours that the warming centers and stuff. I wasn't actually sure if that was a big deal or not. This legislature almost was even going to sit right up until the last minute, but it turns out it was a bigger deal, I guess. Just did the EMO advise the legislature not to sit on that fateful Monday, or would you have had any?
We don't provide, that would be Environment Canada and the weather advice, and then the advice that we'd be providing would be from the first responders, and I would provide that on up through situational awareness reports, and where that goes, I don't know.
Okay, so in terms of the, so that blizzard won't have triggered a federal claim, but would there be some provincial assistance for HRM in dealing with that, or other areas? I'm back to the thing, like, if it's not over $3 million, is a municipality responsible for their own infrastructure? If there's a weather-related event in Glasgow that wipes out the George Street Bridge, that's inside the municipality. Is it always is there any precedent where the province has stepped up and said, okay, we understand you had a weather-related event to damage some of your infrastructure, we're going to help you with that? Is that something that you recall, at least in your tenure, as happening, or?
Ms. Dean?
I would have to look back on that. I guess to your point, not every disaster or every emergency situation is going to have a hard cost to it. So, in terms of damage or something that needs to be repaired through a program like the DFA, as you indicated. So, municipalities generally will make the repairs that they need to infrastructure as a matter of course if something happens to it. The challenge is when it gets into the magnitude of damage, in the over $3 million, because I would say that generally they are able to handle things that happen as a matter of course to their own infrastructure. But certainly if there were unusual circumstances, we would look at how support could be provided. But I guess what I also want to highlight is that not every emergency situation is characterized by disaster or cost. So another really good example of the work of EMO was helping to coordinate refugees who came here last year, to coordinate the clothing and donations, which came in such huge magnitude that people didn't know what to do with them. So they were able to put resources against that. And I wouldn't call that a disaster. It was a wonderful opportunity for the province, but EMO's expertise in relationships coordination, in being able to access support, was instrumental in helping to settle them, right? So it's circumstances that are beyond the norm, where they can step in with their expertise.
Okay. In terms of the, I just want to go back to the Cape Breton floods for a minute before I move on, but I did have a couple messages while this committee was going on that people from that area were saying it's probably about setting expectations appropriately, because we heard this morning that 5 months is, this was all pretty quick, but I guess if you're a victim of that disaster and some elected person comes and puts their hand on your shoulder and says, we're going to take care of you right away, you're not thinking, this is 5 months. So I don't know if there's a lesson to be learned from the response that's communicated to people, because certainly, I don't know how many of those 18 people still haven't had their claim settled for their home, but 5 months later, they're probably thinking, I didn't see this coming, right? In terms of 5 months from now, I'm going to be waiting. So from EMO's perspective, excuse me, this was all, it couldn't really happen any faster. But from the public's perception, maybe their expectation was different. So I don't know if you have a comment on what the expectation, if the expectation was fairly set, or if there's a lesson to be learned in that sense.
Well, I would say it is difficult. And, you know, when people are in situations where they're losing their homes and they're losing, I mean, it's incredible loss for individuals, most acutely those 18 people who couldn't go back to their homes. And we certainly appreciate how difficult that circumstance was for them, and many people in Nova Scotia that had to then endure repairs and try to get back to normal. But you know, it is difficult if you think about having to rebuild a home or move from a home. You know, the process definitely does take some time. And what I would say is that the folks that we have here worked tirelessly to try to communicate with those individuals. We had dedicated people working with them, trying to provide information in real time, explaining the process, you know, explaining exactly what was going to be happening, as much information as we had at the time to
So
share with them.
it worked pretty good from your
You know, as
you're
Amy
probably going to go
said,
back and analyze it in
absolutely,
depth, but
we will.
your gut says it worked pretty good.
We moved at the speed that we could move with. We
Okay.
tried to push the envelope wherever we could, recognizing that some of these things took time.
Okay, no, that's fair. I do want to talk about the Auditor General's report from the fall of 2016, where he talked about critical infrastructure. And I want to ask if there's any progress been made on the AG's recommendations towards identifying critical infrastructure.
No, thank you for that. Yes, so the critical infrastructure audit, I think you would see that we agreed with all of the recommendations that the AG made, and we've been starting to do what we can within the purview of EMO. One of the recommendations did state that there was a desire for clarity around the department that had the responsibility for critical infrastructure. So I mean, that is currently under consideration. But having said that, we're certainly working to strengthen the list that we have around partners that are responsible for critical infrastructure, because knowing who they are then helps us contact the right people in the event that we have to respond to an emergency situation. The other area that we're doing is, you know, ensuring that we expand the list of our critical infrastructure partners to include all 10 sections of critical infrastructure, because I think that was also an element in the AG's report.
So as we sit here today,
Yeah.
is the province fulfilling its requirements under the national strategy? We signed on to a national strategy. Would we say that as we sit here today, the province is fulfilling its requirements under that strategy?
As we sit here today, I would say that there is increased interest in the national strategy. I think it was established in 2009, and at that time, there had been varying levels of engagement on that nationally and provincially. And certainly there have been some further conversations at the provincial and national level about that work and how we can, you know, operationalize it more. And we're doing our part in Nova Scotia to look at that and make sure that we are coordinating with all of the government departments who also hold some of this information as well.
Is there any correlation between our involvement and with the national strategy and getting the claims paid on the like if we were fully compliant, would that kind of ease their audit requirements, or are they separate
No,
things?
Those are separate.
Okay. So do you have a timeline as to when all of the AG's recommendations would be addressed?
Well, we're working through that. I think we have some time to respond back on that, and at the next reporting cycle, we'll be able to say where we are. But, certainly, given the importance of critical infrastructure and the importance of being able to respond, this work is certainly a priority for us at this time.
I just asked very specifically about the Canso Causeway. One of the things the Auditor General was concerned about was there was no, if something happens to the Canso Causeway, what's the response plan? Is that we don't have a lot of time this morning, but is there a plan in place now? I don't think there was when the Auditor General looked at how we would did his review as to how would we respond to a disaster at the Canso Causeway. But is that something that's been resolved now?
My understanding there is that TIR has actually conducted a risk assessment there and is updating business continuity plans to reflect that particular issue, and is also looking at some other high-risk infrastructure as a result of the recommendation that the Auditor General made.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Houston. We'll move to Mr. Wilson for 14 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to continue on with the infrastructure and critical infrastructure, because I think it is important, and definitely I know how critical it is for residents when they go without during or after a disaster. The early days of my first being elected was, of course, Hurricane Juan. I think it was a month after I was elected, and when your constituents go without power for days, they're concerned, and we've seen that more recent in New Brunswick for the ice storms of northern New Brunswick. So it kind of leads me to the infrastructure, of course, of our grid system and the work. I think you've mentioned Nova Scotia Power. Somebody mentioned Nova Scotia Power over the last little while. And I'm sure the relationship of VMO and the work of your department with them, do you feel confident that we're Nova Scotia Power, for example, is able to respond in an appropriate manner? Are you concerned with that infrastructure of the grid system and the aging grid system that we have in Nova Scotia? And did we dodge a huge bullet just recently with warmer temperatures in Nova Scotia, and we didn't see that cold snap that northern New Brunswick seen? Are you confident that we could weather? Well, I guess weather is not the word to use. That we could respond appropriately in our infrastructure, especially our electrical grid system, could sustain a freeze like New Brunswick seen recently?
Ms. Dean?
Well, I would probably say that that's the state of the infrastructure and our ability to withstand, the weather system and effects that New Brunswick did is probably a better question for Nova Scotia Power. But what I can say is that, I think the relationship that we have, the working relationship with Nova Scotia Power in times when we're activating the Provincial Coordination Centre is excellent. I would say has improved over the years. There's better communication, and I think that Nova Scotia Power has also done a lot on its part to make sure that customers are kept apprised of outage information in a timely manner and also estimated restoration time. Each time there is a weather event that's predicted, Nova Scotia Power and Emergency Management are working closely together, and they are in contact. Even recently, during one of the storms that was probably before Christmas, Nova Scotia Power reached out and was being proactive in determining kind of what might be possible in certain areas if the power outages were severe, because they're looking at predictive models along with us. So I would say that there's definitely an enhanced working relationship there, that they have made improvements on their side.
Are you confident that their plan is adequate, that would, in case of a disaster like New Brunswick seen, that they can restore power in an appropriate timeline in Nova Scotia? And listen, over the last 14 years, I have to say I have seen great improvements with communications from Nova Scotia Power, keeping alerts and in contact with myself and my office, but there always is the next storm. So are you confident that they have the appropriate plan in place to hopefully restore power quickly if we do see a nice storm?
Well, again, I'm not going to speak for them. I would expect they have their business continuity plans in place as well. Andy, I'm not sure if you have a comment based on your working relationship with Nova Scotia Power.
Mr. Latham?
Thank you. The relationship has improved immensely over the period of time. And to get into the operational response, and just to be able to provide you the depth of that is, so when we know that there's a weather event that's coming, and I'm just going to pick a arbitrary figure here. Let's say it's 4 days away. We have a big low pressure system that's coming, and there's going to be something that Environment Canada is advising us of. One of our first contacts is with Nova Scotia Power, and we start sharing information with them right away. And then as we lead up to that event and we're getting reports, we get very specific weather reports from Environment Canada. We share that with Nova Scotia Power, other critical infrastructure holders, Bell Alliant, etc. Then we put it out through the Everbridge system to ensure every emergency management practitioner, throughout Nova Scotia has that information as well, that they can make an informed decision. And then when the decision is made that prior to the event impacting Nova Scotia, that we are going to activate the coordination center, Nova Scotia Power sends a representative from their coordination center to our coordination center and sits right in there during the time. So when we were activated, the Nova Scotia Power was switching personnel through there as well, and we have through them direct contact to their operations center and everything that's going on. So what their operators are seeing with the grid and what's going on, we're seeing as well. And an example of that and how the coordination aspect of it works with Nova Scotia Power, and they're pre-staging, they're doing all their planning, and they're provide that information to us about, they've got crews that they're going to pre-stage here and here, they're bringing in whatever it is that they're planning, they're telling us. And in addition to that, when we are activated, so the power is out in a certain area, and we've done this as recently as the blizzard a couple of weeks ago, and they're saying, well, our crews are having a problem getting to area X. So we load up Transportation Infrastructure Renewal, the Departmental Emergency Planning Officer there with their folks, and say, okay, what is it that we need to do to solve this problem? And so there could be snowplows going there. There could be graders going, whatever is required to get those crews there. Then Bell Alliant may call up and say, well, and this particular circuit exchange, telephone exchange, we have battery backup for X number of hours, and the time is clicking down on that. Then we look at the Nova Scotia Power overall restoration plan for that specific area, because it follows physics. The electrons have to flow down the line. You can't automatically turn a place on in the middle of somewhere unless it's all connected through their system, and I do not have the expertise there. However, we put the experts together and they say, okay, this is going to be a priority restoration going through here, so they will get to that, or Bell Alliant will say, okay, we have to get a generator to that specific area in order that we can maintain that circuit. So then we bring in other people to do that. So a protracted answer, but
No, I appreciate that.
I try to give it to you in the fulsome aspect of the response, because it's not just one specific area. It's about everything in its entirety that is affecting that community. So it's telephone, it's the power, it's the roads, It's the municipalities' warming centers. If there's shelters required, then we go through community services and the Red Cross. And that's what it is that we do as far as that coordination piece.
Thank you for that insight on that process. We know I know that the government depends heavily on first responders, and especially as you leave the city, volunteer first responders. What role does your department have, or EMO may have a role, but what role do you have on ensuring that those volunteer departments? We know that the volunteer rate has dropped significantly. I was a volunteer firefighter in Sackville, where we had a composite department, 35 full-time firefighters, 100 volunteers at the time. I think there's 20 volunteers, and that's just in Sackville, Lower Sackville, which is a suburb of the city. In the rural communities, it's even greater. And there's a challenge, I think, with the municipalities, with their tax rate and the sheer population decrease we've seen in rural communities, to maintain those volunteer first responders units across the province. So what role does your department play in making sure that the government and other departments see the need to look at increasing funding, support for services in rural communities across the province, especially those that are volunteer, that EMO depends heavily on if the disaster is outside the city limits here or outside the city limits of Cape Breton? And I know there's smaller municipal units with full-time staff, but for the most part it's Halifax and Sydney. So what role do you play on ensuring the province and the government know that there needs to be an increase support towards those organizations?
Ms. Dean.
So appreciating that I've been with Municipal Affairs for, I think, 9 months, I do know that we have been working closely with the Union of Nova Scotia Municipalities on a review of volunteer fire safety and also of fire services, because it is primarily a municipal responsibility. And, you know, the province does have a role in trying to support those efforts. I can't give you a lot of detail on that work, although I know that we have undertaken some of that, and, you know, would be happy to provide that at some point.
I appreciate that, and I know you're new to it, and what I'm asking is hopefully that you will be, and your department will be, an advocate for these organizations, because it's been very frustrating. You know, 3 years ago, I questioned the Minister of Health, Minister of Labour on support for volunteer firefighters, for increased support for municipalities to get those volunteer units WCB coverage, for example. And at the time, government had indicated, the Minister of Health indicated, there was a lot of areas where we need to improve support for them. There was pending legislation coming, and we haven't seen anything in 3 years. So I'm concerned that it's been put on the back burner from department like Department of Health and Department of Labor. So I know these organizations need an advocate within government, and I would think EMO in your department would be that advocate, and the need to act. I mean, we're very fortunate that there's men and women who volunteer their time in communities across this province who respond to disasters when they have no power, when they have no water in their wells. So I'm just asking that you make it a priority, and hopefully you will. So I know I'm short on time. I want to go to the drought in Southwest Nova. I know my colleagues in my caucus have heard from a number of constituents throughout that process in Southwest Nova about the drought conditions, and we know that they were hearing from people in June, and it wasn't until, I believe, around September 15th when EMO put out, I believe, a message or communications. Why such a time delay, in my opinion, and in the opinion of many constituents? And are you satisfied that you've done a debriefing to make sure that that communication will improve in the future if we see that again?
So in June, that area of the province, and I'm not going to minimize the effect of the drought this past summer because it was more severe than it has ever been in the past, but I think what happened was it probably began to be experienced in June, but that has happened in the past, so municipalities have been able to deal with that. I think what was different this time is that it was prolonged and the water was not coming back, and that was certainly a differentiator from past experiences in that area where dug wells would have run dry. Having said that, we were advised in August by the municipality of the severity of the situation, that it was really becoming chronic. So as soon as we found out that there was assistance required, we reported back. We were able to help them with their drinking water supply. And that actual request from municipalities really didn't come to us until September. So it was later in the summer that we were asked to step in and provide some support, which we did. We were able to get shipments of water directly into the area very quickly, again, thanks to the generosity of partners at the Retail Council of Canada and Labatt Breweries. There was 190 pallets of water that was donated or purchased that went immediately after we were advised that there was assistance required. And the other piece I will say is it was really an effort of all parties to try to respond when the situation was deemed to be much more severe than ever had been experienced in the past. So once we were notified of that, province then stepped in, made the shower facilities open for the parks much longer than the parks were actually open. The municipalities also stepped up to provide public water for residents. TIR supplied tankers so that we could truck water to people where they might need to access it. So there were, other elements of support that were enacted very quickly once we became aware that they needed that assistance.
Thank you. Thank you. I allowed the answer to extend a bit there so you could get
Mr.
that
Chair.
in. We'll move now to the Liberal caucus and Ms. Lonis Croft.
Thank you. And the things you learn at public accounts. I was very interested to hear about the agreement between the New England governors with EMO, and as we approach the 100th anniversary of the Halifax explosion, it's important to note that Boston really came to our rescue at that time. But in doing my research, and you mentioned it a bit, Ms. Dean, the Syrian refugees, that there was EMO involvement in their coming to Nova Scotia, and I want to know why, because that was so unexpected to hear from you, but also read about when I was briefing myself on this topic. And how did you do that? What services did you provide?
Like you, I was unaware of the involvement of EMO in this, and was really pleased to see how staff stepped up to help. So the situation was that the Immigrant Settlement Association of Nova Scotia had extensive experience in settling refugees, but didn't have the capacity to deal with the volume in such a short period of time. And so I'll go out on a limb and say they were asked by EMO to support. But I think it's also part of an all-province response. The province wanted to make sure that all departments that could help in the resettlement of Syrian refugees could provide what supports they would have. And for municipal affairs and EMO would see an opportunity to help coordinate that response because of its expertise in incident command. So basically, my understanding is that EMO was able to coordinate and pull together some of the supports that were required. So we opened a welcome center at Chocolate Lake for the newcomers and brought services to them in a central location. So they needed help with establishing identification, health checks, getting housing support, that kind of information. And then EMO was instrumental in coordinating the Refugee Donation Center at Bears Lake. I think people will recall that that center was absolutely flooded with donations. The generosity of Nova Scotians was evident, and they received enormous donations that had to be then coordinated, and efforts to get those to the refugees had to be coordinated. So 2 EMO staff provided full-time support in the fall and the winter to support that effort, and then in the peak period, other staff volunteered because they wanted to be a part of that. So, Andy, I'm wondering if you'd like to elaborate. You were intimately involved in that response, and perhaps you can add to that.
Mr. Latham?
Thank you. It's an all-province response. It was a challenge for the province to welcome that number of folks. And so when we spoke to the subject matter experts at the Department of Immigration and at ISANS, we quickly recognized that their business model had certain limitations to it. And so we sat down and went through the incident command system with these folks, and recognizing that they're not first responders, but it gives a command and control. So to put it in very simplistic terms, and not necessarily for this audience, but from an emergency management perspective, when you're doing that assessment on a business model, what we looked at was, if you will, there was parts of the pipe that were this big, and what we did was we expanded them to this big in diameter to accommodate the numbers of folks that were coming. And then what we did to ensure that that capacity was there, again, from a coordination perspective, was brought in the other government departments that were required to do that. And so what you have is the Immigration Department, you have ISANS, who are the subject matter experts in assisting folks in that relocation. And we learned a lot as well, because folks coming from different culture, different language, different religious aspects. So an example of that is, as Deputy Dean spoke about, when the donation center was set up, folks could come, but we thought about that, and ISANS educated us as to the challenges that new folks coming to Nova Scotia would face. So we didn't want it to be prescriptive or directive and say, well, here's a box of X number of things and this is what we've determined that you needed. We looked at that and put ourselves in in their position and said, there, but for the grace of God, go any of us, and what would we want? So not knowing anything about retail at all, but we went to Nova Scotia Liquor Commission. We got their display stands. We set it up very similar to a big box store to ensure that the folks that were coming in would have a shopping experience and be able to get their personal things, whether it's clothing for kids or whether it was furniture. And so you would have a shopping experience when you're there. And through the generosity of Nova Scotians, overwhelmed, the shelves were well stocked. And so folks came in and had that shopping experience because we heard very clearly from ISANS and from immigration that people's first experience, if it's good, that usually is an indicator of that they're perhaps going to become permanent residents. And that's what we wanted. We wanted people to feel welcome, and we wanted to ensure that they would be provided the same services as any of us if the shoe was on the other foot. So that's the perspective that we undertook. And that speaks to some of the earlier questions about the all hazards approach that we undertake at EMO. It doesn't matter what the challenge is, that we have the flexibility, the agility to adapt to that. And the folks that were out there from our office that were doing it full-time. There were other folks at our office that wanted to go out and volunteer, as well as all the other Nova Scotians that volunteered to ensure that this was successful. So that's some of what we did in that particular event.
Okay, thank you. I'll pass it on to my colleague.
Mr. Horn.
Thank you very much. You're certainly talking about issues that I've been involved with over my years working for Environment Canada as an environmental response person to spills and other incidents, including fires, pesticide fires, including several plane disasters. What I want to ask, I've been out of the government for 10 years, and we used to have an organization called REIT. I don't know if it still exists. I think it might, maybe in another form. And I know there's been a lot of cutbacks in the federal government in the respects of emergencies officers for Environment Canada. I know you are quite familiar with the Environment Canada weather people, who are very important in any disaster. But also there's other emergency response people that are involved, and also other volunteer groups like the Red Cross. You mentioned the Red Cross here a while ago, but they take a very important part in responding to local spills and local accidents, whether it's air-related, rail-related, that sort of thing. Just wondering, REIT used to kind of decide or help to decide who was the responsible agency for a particular incident, and I'm just wondering if you could expand on that a little bit, how you determine who is the response agency and maybe where REIT stands today, if it's at all. Thank you.
Mr. Latham.
Thank you. So it was a federal government decision to decentralize REIT, and REIT is now out of Montreal, but we still have a active member of EMO that participates in any of that. So with recent events, the grounding of the ship in Cape Breton, we were actively involved, but the Coast Guard would be the lead agency on that, and they would be calling in the federal environmental people. We were having regular situational awareness that we were distributing through the province to Department of Environment and through to all other EM practitioners as we monitored that situation. So it's active, but in another form using the technologies of today, and that was a federal government decision, and we still participate, but it's the Coast Guard that would have the lead on majority of those offshore spill situations, as I'm sure you'd be well aware of.
Okay, Red Cross, I think you should put a plug in there for the Red Cross, because in my own community, we have a group for emergency response and preparedness, and I've been involved with over the last number of years since I retired. And the Red Cross is always involved when you have not just comfort stations, but also evacuation sites and so on.
So as part of our emergency response, the Department of Community Services has a contractual agreement with the Red Cross, and when community services is brought in, they activate with the Red Cross. So the Red Cross, the municipalities are responsible for WAS takes care of shelters, the housing, and the feeding. And there's a coordination point that we go to, and we, as we share situational awareness with all folks, they get it as well, and then they then respond accordingly. And as you said, the good volunteers of the Red Cross are always at the ready to respond.
Aspects of the emergency response and have it worked on and an exercise planned pretty well every year, or are they ad hoc, or is it, because I know the volunteers change a lot, and they do need, when we get new volunteers, to be trained to a certain point. Just wondering if you can comment on that aspect.
Certainly. So the Red Cross takes care of the training. They have a very set number of courses for their volunteers, and I'm aware of that. However, our training, as I was asked earlier about the questions, if you do a debrief, and I spoke about a hot wash, when we identify that there's issues there, that will be part of either a tabletop or a training exercise in order that we can address that and see how, if there was an then we bring, there's a chain in the subject matter experts within the provincial government to provide training in that.
Order. I'm sorry, time has expired.
Thank you.
We will now allow Ms. Deans an opportunity for closing comments.
Thank you. I would like to thank all of you for enabling us to discuss the important work of the Emergency Management Office. I think that it is an organization that is oftentimes behind the scenes, but when it has to step up, it is there in spades, protecting and supporting Nova Scotians in times of emergencies or disasters. I've certainly had a number of opportunities in the last several months to see the work of EMO firsthand, and I would like to say that the individuals that work there are incredibly passionate, and their sense of responsibility and their dedication to helping others is amazing. So I'd like to extend my thanks to Andy and to Paul and the entire team at EMO, and to all of our government and private sector partners that work with us collaboratively when we're in difficult situations. It's obvious to me that EMO takes care of Nova Scotians during some of our most difficult times, and we're very, very fortunate to have an organization like EMO.
Thank you very much. We do have some committee business. We have some correspondence. There are 3 pieces of correspondence we received one from Nova Scotia Business Inc. related to information requested from the January 18th meeting. Is there any questions or comments related to that correspondence? Hearing none, we'll move to the next piece, Department of Transportation and Infrastructure Renewal, and that was information requested from the January 25th meeting. Any questions or comments, Mr. Houston?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In that letter that the committee sent to the department, they asked a very specific question around toll revenues from the Cobequid Pass. It's question number 2 on the specific letter. Back to that question, didn't really speak to the question. The question was, where has the toll revenue been spent? And it was the answer was, I don't want to say evasive, but it didn't answer the question. So I'd like to ask if the committee can send another letter back to Transportation asking for more information on that specific question, which the question was pretty specific. Where was the toll revenue spent? I just think we can drill down a bit further on that.
Okay, any other comments? Okay, we will ask our committee clerk to do as you have asked, Mr. Houston. Any other comments on that piece of correspondence? Okay, hearing none, we'll move to the 3rd piece, which was Department of Municipal Affairs, information requested from the February 1st meeting. Any questions or comments on that? Hearing none. Our next meeting is March 8th, and that will be with Department of Health and Wellness and the Nova Scotia Health Authority. That's on the topic of physician services. Is there any further business to come before the committee? Mr. Houston?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. With the sitting last week and the live streaming, and a lot more people were kind of tuning into what was happening here at Province House and as the legislature. I know in the past the Speaker of the House has made some comments to dress code in the House and some of the things that were happening in the House. I'm not sure what the dress code is for this committee, but since this committee takes place in this chamber, I'd like to make a motion that this committee respect the same dress codes that are applicable, I guess, for when the House is sitting. That may be the case now, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chair, I'm not sure, but I'd like this committee to pass a motion that when this committee is sitting, and it's televised, maybe more committees will be in time as well, but when this committee is sitting, it's sitting in this chamber, and it is televised. I'd like to make a motion that this committee respect the dress codes that are applicable for when the House is in session.
Okay, Mr. Houston has made a motion that the dress code for the Legislative Assembly also be pertain to our committee meetings. All those in favor? Those opposed? The motion is passed. Our clerk will make note of that, and we will make note of that in our rules for the committee here. Thank you. Is there any other further business to come before the committee? Hearing none, this meeting is adjourned.